Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today on another area to take a look a little bit more in depth on with maximizing the value of your Microsoft Cloud subscription. My name is Jeff Naperski. I'm a senior professional services engineer here at Winslow Technology, and what we're going to do today is just making sure that if you're an Azure tenant subscriber that you're getting the best value for your money, and we'll give you some tips and tricks and give you a little bit more insight on how to take a look at that a little bit better. Just as an overview, if you're making the jump to Azure, you're kind of taking a look at that first bill, or you've gotten several bills at this point, and you're just kind of thinking in your head, why is the bill so high? I'm looking at the overall cost of the bill and I don't understand the charges. Are you kind of just thinking in your head, are you getting cost optimized at the end of the day? And even from another standpoint, if you're looking to save some money within Azure, there are some ways that you could save up to 80% on your Azure spend. If you answered yes to any of those questions, then the presentation that we're going to go through is really going to give you a better understanding of that and give you some tips and tricks along the way too. First area that we're going to take a look at is going to be Azure Invoicing. This is an example bill from Microsoft where you could see you're going to have the name of your individual resources, the resource type, region that the resource is sitting in. You'll see the amount of hours consumed for that, or data in gigabytes of what it's going to be consumed, what the billable amount is going to be, what the rate, and then you're also going to see what the value of it is. And then if you take a look at the bottom, you're going to get your grand total for what that was for the month for your normal Azure bill. One of the first areas that we'll take a look at right within your Azure tenant itself is going to be the cost management portal. It's a great little feature that has a lot of good, powerful reporting capability with it, where in the management portal itself, you could pay your bill from there. You could take a look at all of your Azure costs and kind of slice and dice them as you will based off of maybe virtual machines or networking or any other services or resources that you have in there. You can even set spending thresholds, take a look at what the forecast is going to be for the month, so you kind of know what you're potentially going to expect if you're going to keep at that same pace of what you're at. And then you can even export that data out, whether you're going to be presenting that to other team members, executives, however you're going to be giving a little bit more information on the cost of the resources themselves. As far as estimating the Azure cost, there's a couple different ways that you can actually figure out what the cost will be, whether you're already an existing customer, you're going to add some new resources to it, or maybe you're going to even look the jump to get into Azure itself. First one's going to be with Azure Cost Calculator. The Azure Cost Calculator is just an easy to use, great tool that you can select the region. You're going to pick out the resource for what you're going to be looking to add, or maybe even just analyzing the cost of something that you already have in place. You can set your bandwidth and your storage thresholds, and you really will be able to see a true cost of what that resource is going to be per month. And the list keeps constantly growing with the different resources that Azure's adding into the picture. And you can bundle a bunch of them together. You can save estimates and even share that out with other team members if you're kind of building a project up at the same time. If we take a little bit more of an in-depth look at it, I picked one VM that was going to be sitting in the east. It was a normal Windows server. And no SQL databases or anything else associated with it, just hosting a normal production workload. On the left is going to be kind of that worst case scenario where if you jumped into Azure and we're just going to go down the path of pay as you go. So you're going to get billed by the hour by Microsoft, and you also needed the license from them. You can see in this D2 v3 instance that your compute cost is going to be around $70 per month. And then if you're going to also get the OS license from Microsoft as well, that's coming in at a little around $67 per month. So that total cost is going to be about $137.24 per month to have that resource up there. So that's like your worst case scenario where you're not going to be committing to a long-term agreement with it. Maybe you're only going to host it for a couple months and you need the license too. So if you kind of take a look at the right where we start manipulating the data a little bit, I took it down an approach where I know I'm going to keep this resource for a while. It's going to be a production resource that we're going to have for the long haul. That's going to be a 3-year reserved instance that we'll talk a little bit more about later. You could see that price drastically drops where you're telling Microsoft that I'm going to keep this resource within my Azure tenant for a while. So what Microsoft does at the same time is they're going to give you a discount discount because they could know that you're going to get the true cost of that resource over the time instead of maybe getting rid of it in 3 months or a year from now. So you can see that price drop from $70 down to $26 for that same exact resource. And then at the same time, let's say I already had a license that I was going to bring into the Azure platform, that $67 goes away. So taking a look at that true TCO, it originally was $137.24. That cost now drops down to $26.89 a month, netting you an 80% savings on that, which is a big difference for the same resource that could save a lot of money in the long run, especially if you have a lot of resources within Azure itself. Another area that you can take a look at some Azure costs would be if you're an on-premise customer right now and you're looking to maybe make the jump into the Azure cloud platform, there is a tool that Azure has called Azure Migrate, where it's an appliance that you would put on your on-prem resource that would be able to analyze whether you have VMware, Hyper-V platforms, or databases, web apps, anything like that. And it'll analyze what the cost is going to be within Azure itself. And then at the same time, you can use that same tool to actually migrate the resources up into the Azure tenant. So kind of getting some cost analysis right off the cuff with it. And then that tool is also going to help you make that migration into Azure itself if you're not already there, or you're maybe at step 2 where you're adding more resources into the mix of your tenant. Getting a little bit more in depth with the cost optimization side of things. Tons of different ways that you can have different cost savings within Azure. So we're going to highlight a couple of those and just give you some food for thought, some ideas on what you could do to save potentially on that Azure bill per month. First one that we're going to look at is going to be shut down VMs not in use, or you're changing the schedule where you're paying by the hour at the end of the day. So if the resource doesn't need to run 24/7, right within Azure, there are some ways that you can schedule some auto shutdown, auto turn on features that will save you on that cost. Another area that you may or may not expect is you put the resource in Azure and maybe you picked a higher SKU, and at the end of the day, that's going to be something that you're paying extra money that you might not need to. So right sizing that resource or VM is going to be something that you could take a look at. Azure has a baked-in portal that kind of has some analysis on its own that runs through the different areas of cost analysis and kind of best practices within the platform. We'll look at some reserved instances and a hybrid benefit that we saw in that other pricing calculator before. And then there's other ways that you can save cost too, where different ways that you can structure your databases or shift your workloads to serverless computing, and even use containers that are gaining a lot more popularity as the years go on. First one that we're going to look at is the shutdown VMs not in use. Within your Azure VM, you can create auto shutdown and auto start schedules. So like I said before, on that pay-as-you-go type of platform, you're paying by the hour. So if there isn't that 24/7 production workload that maybe from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. you don't want to have turned on, you can actually right within the resource itself schedule an auto shutdown and auto start of that resource. And that's going to have some cost savings for you there. That next area is going to be right sizing the resource. This one's more of a manual process, or you can kind of pair that up with the Azure Advisor that's coming up to see what that might look like. But right within your resource, you have different charts and graphs that show you what your network data looks like, what your CPU usage, what your storage utilization looks like. And you can break that out over 30-day, 60-day timeframes that you can really start to see what the trends are, where at the end of the day, if you're looking at your resource consumption and your CPU and your memory, you're only using 25% of those resources, there could be an opportunity to adjust that VM size, and that's going to give you some cost savings. Depending on the workload, whether it's production or testing, dev test environments, there are burstable virtual machines where if things aren't constantly running and processing transactions, you can switch to a burstable series virtual machine that only uses the resources when it needs it. So at certain times of the day, your cost might be a lot lower than it might be at peak times. So that could be a potential benefit. And you could delete unused disks, and then you can also adjust the disk type. So you went in and you made your VM and you had it set to a premium solid state drive and it's just not using any of those resources and you want to kind of scale that back a little bit, you can flip it down to a standard solid state or even a normal, just regular spinning disk drive. Next area is going to be the Azure Advisor. It's a great tool that I don't know a lot of people do know about, that's baked right in, that there's analytics and different type of advisements that Microsoft already provides that you could take a look and get that holistic approach of what the environment's doing. So this gives you some insight into maybe some potential cost savings on the VMs, where it might recommend to say, hey, make a switch to this resource SKU instead of the one that you currently have because you're not using the resources, or we see that there's no utilization on this virtual machine for the last 10 days. Do you still need it powered on? And then this also takes a look at the security side of things to make sure with some best practices, and from a cost perspective, just to make sure that you're getting your best value for the money. One area that compared to a normal pay-as-you-go where you're paying by the hour, like what was mentioned before, you could go down some other different paths for some cost savings where with reserved instances, you are telling Microsoft at the end of the day, you have a resource or a VM that you want to commit to for 1 or 3 years. That cost could add up to about 72% savings compared to pay-as-you-go for those reserved instances. So even if you were paying Microsoft for the OS license, just with the compute cost alone, there are some potential savings and some significant savings that could make a long-term difference if you are making a long-term commitment to the Azure platform. There are some flexibility to modify the reservations, and then there's either monthly payments or upfront payment terms available for that as well. At the end of the day, with a virtual machine, there's the compute side of the house, and then there's the licensing side. So we took a look at the compute side on the last slide that talks about the different types of ways that you could save there. Another area is going to be that Azure Hybrid benefit that could give you some additional savings on top of that, up to 72% savings. So you can utilize some on-premise licenses that you have that do have the software assurance associated with it. And this does apply to both standard and data center versions of Windows Server. And as you can see, it kind of has a little bit of a breakdown here, and there is a link provided that takes a little bit more of a deeper dive with it, but you could stack licenses for larger VM size, but it's based off of the core of whatever that VM is going to be. So if you had a 4-core Azure virtual machine, you still have to have that minimum 8-core license associated to it. And then with a 16-core, that one changes a little bit. That could be applied to 2 Azure VMs compared to just a single one. So there are some rules associated with it, but you could see that there are some potential savings that are there as well. Some of those last ways for potential savings is with the databases. So if you have a bunch of single databases, you can merge them together into an elastic database that kind of can fine-tune the way that you have different resources allocated to each VM, and you're putting them under that single database layer that could give you some additional savings compared to each individual instance, and you're going to get more granular control at the same time. If you have some key production pieces at the end of the day, you could shift them to serverless computing. That maybe an example of that would be taking some of that code that you have in other areas of the applications and making them function. So what that's amounting to at the end of the day is you're going to have less infrastructure sitting there in your Azure tenant, and there's going to be some cost savings there as well with it. And then the last area that's gaining a lot more popularity is with containers. Azure has their own built-in platform of the Kubernetes service that is a containerized platform that uses a lot less compute. So what that's going to amount to is you have to have less resources in Azure, so you're going to get some cost savings there as well. To kind of sum everything up, as you can see, there's a lot of different tools that are available out there at your fingertips already to analyze your workloads or future workloads that you're going to put within the Azure tenant. There is no one-size-fits-all solution, so you may only have to use pieces of it. You may have additional requirements or complexities that could change the way that your cost savings could be. If you're just going to lift and shift your workloads at the end of the day, That's always going to be the biggest cost. And then you definitely want to take a closer look at the reservations and if you can bring some on-prem licenses there with you to get some savings, compared to just using some of the other Azure resources that are available out there. And then, like I said, there's always different ways that you can take a normal standard SQL database and try to move it more into an Azure SQL database using some of their functions and automations that does, at the end of the day, have a cheaper cost compared to just having a normal VM and putting SQL on it, for example. Even with your web applications, there's different ways within the Azure portal that you can add web apps that could change the way, instead of having it rely on an Azure VM with that traditional IaaS service. If you are considering running cloud-based resources, you really want to take a look at your short-term and long-term strategies. So you're going to want to ask those questions. What do you see this environment look like a year from now? What does it look like 3 years from now? Because that could really change the way on what your Azure bill is going to look like at the end of the day, per month or per year. Like I mentioned before, you really want to make sure that you're looking a good hard look at what you could do for reserved instances or the licensing. That's where your biggest cost savings could be. Even if you have an on-prem environment, you can take a look at maybe a hybrid approach where you still have your on-prem resources, but then maybe you can start working to move some of your resources up into the Azure cloud platform. And then you always want to just make sure, how are you going to secure these workloads? And some other big areas that play into this is just with your business continuity and your disaster recovery strategy. How are you going to make sure that these resources that you have that are mission critical are going to be protected at the end of the day? Winslow Technology Group is always going to be here. If you are going to be making the change to either having workloads up in Azure already, or maybe looking to add some of those other workloads to it, we can actually help you throughout that process, where we do have an Azure assessment. So whether you're looking to get into the cloud or you're already there already and you just really want to make sure that you're kind of getting your best value for your money, you can leverage our cloud expertise to make sure that your environment is right-sized. If you already have those on-prem licensing, we'll take a look at the cost to make sure that you're getting that best value for your money. And then we'll take a more in-depth approach of what the security side of the house is going to be. So are there any gaps in the security area, or just taking a look to make sure that you can get your best security posture possible in this day and age. And then the last area that we'll take a look at, and at the end of the day, we're going to provide an in-depth analysis on, is just making sure that your single points of failure or any other possible areas that you can have failures with are going to be protected at the end of the day. So if you want to learn more about that, we have some additional resources that we can provide to you. But best way to reach out to us is going to be info@winslowtg.com. Hope this was helpful for you guys. Appreciate the time, and I hope you have a great day.